In 1894, the greatest minds in urban planning gathered to solve an impossible crisis. Cities were literally drowning in horse manure. New York alone produced 1,100 tons of it every single day. They debated for 3 days, found no solution, and gave up. Within 20 years, the problem had completely vanished. Not because anyone solved it, but because something no one predicted made horses obsolete practically overnight. This story about the great horse manure crisis will change how you think about every unsolvable problem you've ever worried about. Hey, welcome to Forgotten Trades, where we dig into the lost jobs, forgotten inventions, and strange turning points of history in a way that actually makes sense. And trust me, this one is wild. In this video, you're going to learn how horses completely dominated every major city on Earth and why no one could imagine life without them. You'll hear about the 1894 manure crisis that had newspapers predicting cities buried under filth within decades. You'll discover how a conference of the world's top urban planners gave up after just 3 days. And you'll see how a technology nobody saw coming erased the entire problem and destroyed whole professions in the process. Stay until the end because the parallel to problems we face right now is genuinely unsettling. To understand why the horse manure problem was so terrifying, you first have to understand just how completely horses dominated daily life in the late 1800s. We're not talking about a few carriages trotting down cobblestone streets. By the 1890s, New York City alone relied on roughly 100,000 horses. London had even more. These animals pulled omnibuses, delivery wagons, fire engines, ambulances, construction equipment. Basically everything that moved in a city moved because a horse pulled it. And here's what people don't realize. This wasn't some quaint arrangement. This was industrial-scale dependence. A single horse-drawn omnibus company might own thousands of animals. Entire neighborhoods existed just to stable, feed, and care for these horses. Blacksmiths, harness makers, stable hands, hay dealers, veterinarians. A massive chunk of the urban economy revolved around keeping horses alive and working. Removing the horse from a 19th century city would have been like removing electricity from a modern one. Unthinkable. Absolutely unthinkable. So when people started noticing the, shall we say, byproducts of all these horses, nobody could just say, well, get rid of the horses. That would be like telling a modern city to get rid of its cars, trucks, and buses all at once. The world ran on horses. Period. Now here's where it gets truly staggering. Each horse produced somewhere around 15 to 30 pounds of manure per day. Multiply that by 100,000 horses in New York, and the city was dealing with roughly 1,100 tons of manure hitting the streets every single day. Every single day. On top of that, those same horses produced an estimated 60,000 gallons of urine daily, soaking into unpaved roads, pooling in gutters, seeping into basements. But wait, there's more. Have you ever thought about what happens to a working horse at the end of its life? In a city like New York, thousands of horses collapsed and died on the streets each year. Removing a dead horse from a busy road was an enormous logistical problem. Sometimes the carcasses were just left there for days, even weeks, while they decomposed enough to be sawed apart and hauled away in pieces. I know, it sounds medieval, but this was the 1890s. This was happening in the most modern, advanced cities on the planet. The manure piled up in vacant lots, sometimes reaching stories high. In summer, the stench was overwhelming. Clouds of flies bred in the filth and spread disease, typhoid, cholera, infant diarrheal diseases that killed thousands. The streets weren't just dirty. They were genuinely dangerous. And every year the problem got worse, because every year cities grew, and more horses arrived to serve them. So by the late 1890s, urban planners knew they were facing a crisis. and in 1898, New York hosted an international urban planning conference. Delegates from cities across the world came together to tackle the biggest challenges facing modern cities. The horse manure problem was at the top of the agenda. These were serious, accomplished people: engineers, city planners, public health officials. The conference was scheduled to last 10 days. It ended after 3. The delegates couldn't find a solution. Think about that for a second. The greatest minds in urban planning history, gathered specifically to address this crisis, looked at the numbers, debated the options, and essentially said, "We have no idea how to fix this." Newspapers at the time ran dire predictions. One famous forecast suggested that by the 1930s, London's streets would be buried under 9 feet of manure. The Times of London reportedly called it the greatest challenge facing civilization. The 1894 manure crisis wasn't some quirky historical footnote. It was considered an existential urban threat. And this is where I want you to notice something. Nobody, not a single expert at that conference, said, "Hey, maybe someone will invent a machine that replaces the horse." Not one person. The automobile, as we know it, simply didn't exist in their imagination as a practical solution. They were trapped inside the problem, unable to see outside the system that created it. Remember that, because we're going to come back to it. While those urban planners were wringing their hands, something was quietly happening in workshops and garages that would render their entire debate meaningless. Engineers like Carl Benz and Henry Ford were tinkering with internal combustion engines. In 1908, Ford introduced the Model T. And here's the thing about technology solving problems. It doesn't politely announce itself. It doesn't wait for permission. It just arrives and reshapes everything. The automobile didn't spread because anyone planned it as a solution to the horse manure problem. It spread because it was faster, cheaper to maintain over time, and didn't produce mountains of waste in the streets. By the mid-1910s, automobiles were outselling horses in major American cities. By the 1920s, horses had essentially vanished from urban streets. A problem that the world's greatest experts declared unsolvable in 1898 was gone within a single generation. Not because of better waste management, not because of policy, not because of regulation, but because an entirely unexpected technology made the source of the problem obsolete. That is an extraordinary thing to sit with. The solution to the great horse manure crisis wasn't a better shovel. It wasn't a manure recycling program. It wasn't urban planning at all. It was automobile history unfolding in a direction nobody foresaw. The answer came from completely outside the frame of the question. But here's the part of this story that connects to everything we talk about on this channel. The horse manure crisis didn't just create a public health emergency, it created entire professions. In London, crossing sweepers stood at busy intersections and swept paths through the muck so that well-dressed pedestrians could cross without ruining their clothes. We covered them back in our video on crossing sweepers. Down in the sewers, toshers waded through the runoff looking for coins, metal, and anything of value that washed down with the filth. We told their story too. Stable hands, horse breeders, harness makers, farriers, manure collectors, knackers who disposed of dead horses, tens of thousands of people earned their living because of the horse economy. When the automobile arrived, it didn't just solve the manure problem. It destroyed the entire ecosystem of jobs that had formed around it. The crossing sweepers disappeared. The toshers' underworld dried up, literally. The blacksmiths who shod horses had to reinvent themselves as auto mechanics or close up shop. None of them saw it coming. None of them had a transition plan. One unexpected solution swept away a crisis and an entire way of life in the same stroke. Quick note, a lot of the specific numbers from this era are based on historical estimates that vary between sources. The exact tonnage, the exact horse counts, the precise timeline of the conference. Historians debate the details. What isn't debated is the scale of the crisis and how completely and unexpectedly it was resolved. Important reminder: when we draw modern parallels, we're talking about patterns, not predictions. History rhymes, but it doesn't repeat exactly. So let's pull this together. In the 1890s, the world's greatest cities faced a problem that the smartest people alive could not solve. The great horse manure crisis was real, it was worsening, and every projection said it would only get worse. A conference of top experts gave up in 3 days. Newspapers predicted doom. And then, within roughly 20 years, the problem simply ceased to exist. Not because of any plan, but because unexpected solutions emerged from a technology that nobody at that conference could have imagined. And that brings me to the thought I want to leave you with. Right now, we face problems that feel exactly like the 1894 manure crisis felt back then. Climate change, energy shortages, resource depletion. The experts debate, the projections look grim, and it feels like there's no way out. But the lesson of the horse manure crisis isn't, "Don't worry, technology will save us." The lesson is more nuanced than that. It's that transformative solutions often come from completely outside the frame of the current debate, from directions that nobody is even looking. The greatest breakthroughs don't improve the existing system. They replace it entirely. Technology solving problems rarely looks like what we expect. And the people most affected, like those crossing sweepers and toshers whose jobs vanished, are usually the last to know. History doesn't repeat, but it has a rhythm. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. If this story shifted something in how you think about unsolvable problems, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about this kind of history. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. Next up, we're telling the story of the Match Girls, the strike that changed workers' rights forever in 1888. It's another case where people everyone ignored ended up reshaping the world. I'll see you there.